So far, we have touched on the basics of Figma. We've added shapes, we've added text, we've applied some styling using the design panel. We've done some basic stuff with auto layout, and I've explained the different ways that you can use auto layout. And if you've got absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, just head back to the channel, find the playlist for specifically for Figma, and just have a quick look through at what we've covered so far on this channel. But today I thought we'd take it a little bit of a step further and go for a more advanced layout, putting sort of to use what we've done so far. And I've actually managed to get for you a real world brief. So this is from one of my clients, Ben. Ben's company is called Bouncing Sprout, and Bouncing Sprout specialize in plugins for WordPress. You don't need to know any more than that, but essentially what the current brief is for a website called Boomerang, so a new plugin that he's made, and the premise is to gain feedback from users on ways to improve your product. So I just thought it might be handy for me to sort of run you through the website as it is, and maybe just sort of pick pieces to sort of recreate and show you how I made them, so you can sort of see how the sort of skills that I've taught you in the previous episodes can be applied to a real world, real client brief. So without nattering for a million years, I'm going to head straight into Figma now, and just first and foremost, just run you through the design we have. So it's quite a simple design. We start with the sort of standard navigation bar that you find across most websites. I kind of tend to find when I'm designing to sort of stick with conventions as much as possible is sort of a great thing for user experience. So I think we've all seen a website that looks a little bit like this. And I think with design, you'd normally have that kind of attitude of, well, wouldn't you want something a bit more original? But in all honesty, I think yes, you want to have original design, but you need that familiarity for your users. So the location of your main call to action buttons, such as the buy now buttons, the positioning of links to different pages of your site at the top. These are all things that make for a great user experience because they're so familiar. So with web design, yes, I think originality and creativity is hugely important. It obviously is. It creates sort of an authentic brand. There's benefits to doing that. But at the same time, reusing elements that you've seen across the web, they're established for a reason, and that's primarily because they're at least working for someone. If you think that there are however many websites out there employing the use of big text and the call to action button in specific locations, well, you can guarantee that a good percentage of those sites actually have a function, a purpose that's working. They're earning income, or they're gaining subscribers. So it's kind of a balance of creativity and originality with borrowing things that are established for a good reason. So with this nav bar and the entire hero section, I think we can all agree it's quite a familiar feeling. Some mock-ups sort of displaying what the app does on a phone screen, the navigation bar at the top with the logo, and then sort of nice big sort of intro text, the sort of H1, that primary heading, to introduce in as short a line as possible what the tool is about and what it does, with some small, clean, easy to read follow-up text, that small paragraph Boomerang provides, blah, 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 blah. And then that call to action button, sort of, to get started. Because there are going to be some people who have visited your site before and considered, and then return to your site with the intention of signing up. And that's why you want those buy now buttons, or whatever it is for your site or your purpose, get started, whatever you have. You want them nice and big, and you want them in those familiar places so that people can open your website, and from that very first section, before they've even had to scroll, they can get started. So just scrolling through, really simple. We have a little bit of a sort of glassy sort of translucent background blur effect applied to sort of 4 sections here. But again, really simple. In terms of the design, it was just the case of some basic shapes, again, the text and some icons. And I'm going to touch a little bit on Figma plugins today, and just show you, where I got some of these icons from, and how you can sort of do this with your own projects. But the purpose of the site was really just to show off screenshots, make it clear for people what this plugin does, and do so in a way that's clean and non-distracting. We don't need to spend, hundreds on some specific, creative part of the design, when realistically we need to cleanly and conveniently for the user display the information, and get them signed up as swiftly as possible. So that's realistically the purpose of this site. It's quite straightforward. But yeah, I thought I'd just sort of touch on a few bits with you, and maybe sort of redesign a few sections alongside you, and hopefully this will give you a bit more of an insight into how to apply, what we've sort of touched on before. So I'm just going to dive into the nav bar. So you might notice that when I click on, let's say, the text here, it's surrounded by a blue box. So the main sort of the bounding box of that shape is blue. When I click on the nav bar, you'll notice that it's purple. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned components at all in Figma, but components are a really, really great place to sort of start with websites. So great things to make components are navigation bars and buttons in particular, two things that you're going to reuse across the site. So where the nav bar is going to appear on every single page, the button could appear on multiple times throughout any of the pages on your site. So basically, components are a way to create designs or kind of elements that you plan to reuse throughout your design that you can perhaps tweak in small ways away from the original, but all in all, they'll stay fairly similar to that original. So I'll just show you now quickly how that works with the button. So we'll start with the button. So we have got text, first of all, inside that button that says buy now. So I'll just hit the T on my keyboard, or I've gone up here to the toolbar at the top and selected the text button. And I'm just going to click anywhere to start typing. And I'm going to say buy now. Conveniently, it's already in the same font as the rest of the design, so there's nothing else for me to do. But what I'm going to do to create my button is press Shift A to add auto layout. I'm going to undo that quickly just to show you an alternative way is to have this selected, right click, and you can put add auto layout. Another way, if you want to go long-winded, add a frame, and then to that frame on the right-hand side in the design panel, click add next to auto layout. So I'm just going to go back and Shift A. There we go. So now we have a bounding box surrounding the buy now button. So if you sort of set up things for the button, as you can see here, just make sure yours looks the same, otherwise it could get confusing. So you've got the width and the height grayed out because directly underneath them, the width and the height is set to hug content. Okay, you don't want this set to fixed width, because if I then go and edit the text and it goes on much longer, the frame is now, you can see the frame's bounding box, the blue box is smaller than the full content. So if I now go and set this to hug contents, it now perfectly frames that with our margin and padding, which I'll get to in a second. So first things first, make sure that it's set to hug. I'm going to get rid of this weird word that I've added on the end. And we're back to where we were. So with the frame selected, the next thing I'm going to do is just go and check out what sort of spacing we've got. So the first one here, this horizontal gap, at the moment, this is completely irrelevant. Okay, this only sort of comes into play if we have other elements. So if I just grab a small circle, let's just say that we've got like an icon, for example, in our button. This first one here, this horizontal spacing, determines the gap between elements within the frame, so within that auto layout. But we're just going to go with text. So all in all, that horizontal spacing can be set to 0, left alone. It really is irrelevant. The things that are important are the padding left and right and the padding on top and bottom. I have a kind of approach with the way I handle buttons. I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but I tend to do, let's say X was the measure of, 1x would be the gap on the top and bottom. I then have 2x on the left and right. So what that actually means in English is the spacing above and below the button is half, ultimately, of what I like to put either side. I tend to go with 12 on, I've done that wrong way around. I tend to go with 12 on the top and bottom and 24 on the sides. Sometimes I bring that up to 16 and 32. I sort of play around with each project and sort of see, but for now I'm going to go with 24 pixels on the left and right and 12 on the top and bottom. If you ever have a button with the with 12 pixels applied to the sides and the top and bottom, I just think the shaping just doesn't look right. I think it's quite a common practice to have that sort of button take up a greater width, and have a bigger spacing on the sides than the top and bottom. It's just sort of a common practice that I like to stick to. So I'm going to go with 24 pixels on the left and right, and then 12 pixels, so half of that on the top and bottom. So the next thing to do is actually make it look like a button. I think the first thing that sort of will help us to do this is to add a fill. So with that button selected, or in my case, frame 52, let's just rename that quickly. Button, there we go. In the design panel, let's head down to fill, and just next to fill, let's click on the plus icon to add a fill. And what's happened is our text has disappeared, And reason being, we can't see it because the background of the button and the text are now completely white. So on this site, what we have are sort of blue buttons. So I'm just going to select the fill. So select on this little white box here just next to it. Unless you know the color code, you can type it in. I prefer just to use the selector. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the eyedropper tool and just hover over this section here on the button just to make sure we're getting the same color. And now the text has magically come back. So the next thing to sort of do from here, I mean, you might find you want to change the text color, in which case select the text and go ahead and do the same thing. I like to work with styles when I work. And again, I think this is something that you might find useful that I'm not sure if we've touched on yet. The way styles works is quite similar to how you'd use a component. When you're reusing things multiple times throughout a project, such as a color or a font or a specific size of the font, all these things that sort of matter to your project for the sake of consistency. Just the same way a component means that you can consistently use the same buttons and nav bars throughout all your pages. Styles allow you to use text styles and colors and even things down to like border radius on some applications as a sort of contained variable that you can sort of keep a master copy of. And I'll stop talking and I'll show you what I mean. So with the button selected, at the moment we've got this kind of blue color set as the fill. And it's fine. You don't have to do this. This is just the sort of way I like to work to make things easier. But in order to sort of, let's say we've got another button, I'm just going to copy this over. And if you're like, how did he do that? Just press Alt with anything you've got selected and just drag. It's an easy way to sort of copy and paste. So yeah, I suppose let's just say this was a completely different color and we want to match it to this blue. We can always select the fill, come down, get the eyedropper tool and match. Completely fine. But now when I edit this blue and I come down here and I change the color of it, it's not reflected across the site. So for example, this button here is completely untouched. So a different way to do things is using styles. So with the button selected and you sort of head down to the sort of fill section, these 4 dots here just to the left of the add button. So click on the 4 dots to click on the style panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on this plus here at the top to create a new variable. And as soon as that's popped up, I just want you to switch to style. So just in case you're here on the variable side of things, just make sure you switch over to style and then give your style a name. So I'm going to call this primary blue. Now what that's done is it's changed the fill of this button to that primary blue. So if I was to say copy another version of this button, you'll now see that it says primary blue. And we can do the same sort of thing with the text. So I'm just going to select both lots of the text in both the buttons. I'm going to go 4 dots, click on plus, style. I'm just going to call this white. Okay, no need to do this if you don't find it appropriate for your project. But what you should now see on the right-hand side in the design panel, we've now got color styles. So these color styles are basically completely reusable. We can use it across the whole site and update them. So if we click on this edit style button here, if you've got a big team and you've got lots of people working on your project, you can describe really clearly where certain styles should be used. But the big selling point is the ability to make changes. So if you just have a look at the buttons here, now I've clicked on edit style and I've selected the property at the bottom. I can edit that blue and it will be reflected across the entire website. So just a really, really easy way for you to sort of stay on top of your color styles to make sure that you're maintaining consistency, which is really important for web design in particular. So yeah, that's the kind of way I do the setup for the button. And then just to match his style, what we'll do is we'll add the roundness. And I think the last thing I did was a really small, I'll just change the background color to white, just so I can see. If you're not sure how to do that, by the way, just click on the design panel with nothing selected. Where it says page, just click on that color and you can change it there. So with the button selected, I'm going to add a drop shadow by going down to effects and clicking plus. And then just that little sun icon, effect settings, we're going to click on that next to where it says drop shadow. And we're going to play around with the settings a little bit. So I'm going to click within this color picker. I'm going to go and grab my blue. And that looks hideous in my opinion. So what I like to do is bring the opacity all the way down just till we've got something subtle like that. So that's pretty much the button. So now we've kind of touched on styles and we've shaped a button using auto layout. Now is where I kind of wanted to talk about how components are handy. Sorry, I had a little bit of brain fog there. So with the button selected, what we want to do is come up to the toolbar at the top and you can see these 3 icons in the middle. The first one is create component. What you're going to do is select that. And now what you've done is turn button into a component. So this is the master component. The reason we can tell that is because when you have a little look at that component next to the word button or whatever it's called, you've got the sort of component icon just to the left. So that means this in particular, this instance of button is the primary use case. So if I was to copy and paste button and make a second version, you'll see that it doesn't have that icon. It doesn't have a name. It's just an instance of button. Now, when I go ahead and make any changes to the button, let's capitalize that N, you'll see it's reflected on all buttons across the site. So a really great way for you to make repeated sort of design elements that you can reuse. But I know exactly what you're probably going to be thinking is, how often do you have the need on your site for a ton of buttons that all have the same words, right? I mean, it might be useful on your hero section to, for example, to have the words buy now. But on your newsletter page, it might make more sense for you to have a copy that says sign up. So this is where components have a little bit more to offer. So if we make sure that we select the text, and if you're ever unsure how to select within things, a really great tip with Figma is to hold control and deep select. This sort of allows you to select whatever you're pointing at. So if I hover over the button right now with control not selected, you can see it wherever I put my mouse, it wants to select the parent element, right? It wants to select the button as a whole. If I hold control and hover over, you can see when I hover over the edges, it wants to select the button. But as I hover over the text, it knows that I'm trying to deep select, so it's going to select that text. So select the text, and what we're going to do is just come down here to the text panel on the design pane, and just underneath all of these text settings, it says buy now, right, which is exactly the same text that we've got in that text box. But over to the right, we've got a button called create text property. If we just select that, we're then prompted to give it a name. So text is completely fine. The name of this variable is text, and the value, or the default value, is buy now. So if I create property, that's now all set up. So now when we've got individual instances of the button, while they might sort of take from the original, if you like, until you alter them, what you now have is the potential to change what's inside that button. So if you have one of the sort of variants selected and come over to the right hand side again to the design panel, just below where you can select which component you're trying to use, there's this variable text has now been added and is completely editable. So on the right hand side, you can now change the text and press enter, and now you still have the ability to change things about the button. For example, let's say you want buttons on your site to be no longer rounded, right? So we can set the border radius to 0. That still reflects across all the buttons, but the copy that you've changed, the kind of override that you set, so these are sort of technically design overrides from the primary design, they'll remain. So you can do this with all sorts of things. So it's not just the text contained within. There's all sorts of things that you can bring out, you can create variables with all sorts of things within Figma. But I just, I don't want to spend the whole thing talking about buttons and components, but I just think components are really useful, as I say, particularly for web design and use cases like that. You also have the ability with components to delete or remove things from certain instances. And while that makes no sense whatsoever for a button, it can make sense for a navbar. So I'm going to delete these now. Actually, I'll just delete the instances just in case. I'm just going to have a look at this navbar. So here we've got, I'm just going to detach instance and return it into a component. The reason I'm doing that is because I've just pulled this over from another Figma project. So I'm just going to reset that, so to speak. So for example, this is now the main. If you have a little look here on the layer panel on the left, you can see the icon for components is just next to navbar. So this means this is now the primary component. So if I was to copy and paste this, just so we've got another version, let's say you're trying to make a squeeze page, right? So a page on your website that you do want to have some navigation, but you don't want to give your users a ton of options because you're really trying to squeeze them into a particular action. At that point, these additional links, so feature requests, contact, pricing, and documentation, they might not be useful to you anymore. You might just want that button. You can delete them and they won't show up. You haven't changed anything about the component. You've just hidden them from view. So if you see again on the layers panel, you can see that they are all still there. They've just been switched off, that they've been set to hide. And what that's done for us is basically we've still got an editable component. We've still got something that we can drag and drop into our designs. Straight from the assets panel. I have not even touched on that, but on the left hand side, if you, instead of on the layers, you've just changed that to assets, you can drag in the components that you've made onto the canvas and into your designs. So what I'm basically saying here is it doesn't have to stick to it exactly. You can change the links, you can delete them, you can alter them, and you can also have different variants, which I think is really important when you're talking about responsive design. So if I just delete this, and I'm just going to grab this now, this is the primary instance. On the toolbar at the top, we've now got this option to add a variant. If I select this, we've now got two designs contained within the navbar component wrapper. So you might want to move this to another page or just move outside of your project. It's not very common necessarily to create or edit components within the design. So just move it outside and just have it in an area you can look at it. But you can create variants. So this is variant 1 and it's called default. This is variant 2 and we're going to call this stripped. And this will be just like the one I showed you there the second time round. And what we're going to do is remove all of the links just by selecting them all and pressing delete. So this is the version of the nav bar that's sort of stripped down to the bare bones. There's no distracting links to click on, just that buy now button. And then what you can do is just add with this little plus icon here, or just select the nav bar variant. Just select the nav bar component as a whole and click add variant again. This time around, we can delete the entire thing. We can delete all of that, and perhaps we want to add, and let's just quickly whip up a hamburger icon. If I just quickly make something like this, select all three, and size this right the way down, and just press Ctrl G to group it. I'm going to change this to a color that you can actually see because that is completely useless right now. I'll just move that all the way down to the bottom. And I'm just going to drag this group into the navbar. So it might make sense for you to call this version mobile. And what I'm trying to show you here is that you've now got 3 different versions of the navbar set up within the initial component. So if you come over to assets and find navbar, let's drag this into our design. So let's drag this into the home file, the home page, right at the top. Let's center it and move it to the top of the screen. Now what we've got is the ability to switch between variants. So on the right-hand side next to property 1, we've got default, we've got stripped, and we've got mobile. And the good thing is this mobile is completely responsive, so we can resize it to the right size for our screen. And what we've got now on the mobile is the reduced version of the menu with that hamburger icon, sort of to expand that menu as we're familiar with on mobile. So that's kind of an introduction of how components can be really useful with design. I have absolutely no idea if this is useful to you whatsoever. I know I'm very aware that I'm just rambling on through my design. This might not come in handy, but if this helps you at all, please do drop a comment. Give a like and subscribe. If this actually provides you with some help, let me know, because otherwise I'll just keep talking forever and it will be a very boring channel. So yeah, let me know how it's going, and if there's anything in particular you need help with, just make sure you're sort of dropping that down. So the next thing I mentioned already that I was going to talk to you about was plugins. So I probably will do an episode on my favorite plugins and sort of an overall look at the sort of plugins I use and how to install and use plugins, something a bit more specific. But icons are something that I think web designers in particular rely on quite heavily. And plugins are great for that particular use case. I mean, there's loads of things. There's loads of plugins that web designers use, and I could touch on so many of them. I mean, Lorem Ipsum is a plugin for Figma that allows you to essentially select a text box that you've made in your design, and if you've got no idea what copy to use, you can just generate Lorem Ipsum text that will perfectly match the available room that you have available. So there's lots of plugins, but the one I think I'll show you today is icons. So how I managed to get hold of these icons for this page. So there's a few I use. I use material icons, or I use bootstrap icons. There's some good ones, primarily because they're free, and I don't find I've ever had a sort of case where I've needed to sort of go beyond those. There's been the rare time that it's been super specific, like icons that are needed, that I've designed my own. But again, it's a bit like what I'm saying here with the familiarity of that navbar and the hero section. If something works, don't fix it. If something's right for your project and it's borrowed, not entirely copied perhaps, but if something's been reused from another design because it's working for you, then brilliant, because the chances are it'll be familiar to your users, especially when we're talking icons, they connote a certain meaning. If users have got used to icons meaning certain things, like I showed you there with the mobile version of the navbar with the hamburger icon, people have come to learn what that means. So why would you come up with something original? There's a certain fact, a certain element of truth to that. Why would you change the design of something that's working if it's not broke? Don't fix it. So yeah, icons. Let's do this. So in order to sort of use a plugin, at least for the first time, there's sort of two ways to do it. You can go through the community. So you go to the homepage, visit the community tab, and start searching and finding things there. The way I tend to do it is just to click on this resources button in the toolbar. If we click on that, you can then see components. So another way to load up the assets in your current file. But there's also two other tabs. There's plugins and widgets. Full transparency, widgets, I've never touched them. I've just never touched them. There's probably a world of stuff I could explore there, and maybe I will further down the line. But at the moment, plugins are sort of all I've been needing. So I'll just sort of show you some of the plugins that I've been using. There are tons here that I've been using. So these are all the ones that I've saved or, used over the years. So the most recent one I've used is Bootstrap icons, and you can see material symbols there. So good use case already. That's what I was trying to show you. This is how I gain access to hundreds and thousands of icons. But plugins can do all sorts of things. So for example, the Unsplash plugin, if you're familiar with Unsplash, I'll just draw out a rectangle for you in the design. I'll just give it a little bit of color so you can see where it is. Unsplash is basically a stock image library that's completely free and doesn't require any attribution whatsoever. At least it was the case. Don't take my word for it and get in trouble. But select a rectangle, a frame, anything you want, and press Control P if you've already used it. If it's the first time you've used it, make sure you go to the resources panel, go to plugins, and just type in Unsplash. You will have to do it this way if it's the first time you've used it. Once you've used it once or twice, or you've saved it, you can access it a lot more easily by pressing Control P to sort of open up the command field, and then just type in Unsplash and enter. And this is kind of the first time I'm showing you what a plugin looks like. And in all honesty, they look different every single time. They're custom built. So we can type in, let's say, laptop. And now we've got hundreds of images from really talented photographers available to us for free. That once you've got something selected, that's what I say, make sure you've got a frame selected, just click on it and it will perfectly fill that frame. It's really great. So that's just an example of how plugins can come in handy with Figma. You can build out a kind of wireframe of a website and then use Unsplash to just drop pictures into those slots. It's so handy, really, really easy to use. Icons wise, I use, like I say, Bootstrap icons or material symbols. Nice and easy, nice and straightforward. Bootstrap's possibly a little bit less flexible. This is just what the icons are. That you've got no sort of customization options. You've got the ability to choose occasionally between filled and outline, but they're really great icons. They do the job, and they include social media. So, for example, if I need a Facebook icon or an Instagram icon, I can just type it into the search bar, press the icon, and then this is always fun. I never know where it goes. It will put it somewhere on your canvas to sort of use. But this is here as an SVG, so it's completely scalable. It doesn't lose quality when zoomed in. You can recolor it any way you like. Just great ways to use icons, and that's exactly what I've done here. So here we're using auto layout to create a row of 4, and within each row of 4 to create these sort of boxes with the background blur and the icons, and that's exactly how I did it. So just use plugins to your advantage. Honestly, there's so many out there. There's plugins to help you create really cool gradients. There's plugins to help you bend your text in a certain way. There's all sorts of plugins. There's another plugin I really like called Smooth Shadow, which it can create some really, really nice shadow effects without looking harsh. I think a lot of shadow people, I don't know why this is such a big thing in the design world, but people get shadows really wrong. There's shadow snobs exist, trust me. So Smooth Shadow is a really great tool for being able to add shadows to sort of elements that look really nice and realistic. So if I just add again another rectangle, and it's one that I've used before, so I can press Control P and Smooth Shadow, press Enter, and you can just sort of see the quality of that shadow. We've got a sort of drop off. It's not just a normal shadow, you've got lots of layered shadows. And if I select it, you can see here in the effects pane, it's not just added one, it's added 6 different shadows. So we've got layers being added. It's a really nice plugin. But anyway, I'm getting off the point and just talking about shadows. So yeah, again, that's what I've used here. Just some really simple screenshots, a rounded corner, and yeah, those nice smooth shadow effects. To be honest, the same things have been applied with components and auto layout from this point forward. So I think we've kind of touched on what we need to sort of show you how I've taken what I've taught you in the previous episodes into this design. And I am aware that I have pretty much just spoken to you and shown you a few things, but please do drop a comment. Let me know if it's been useful at all whatsoever. I really want to help people improve. I really want to provide content that, you know, people aren't just stumbling across, but actually try to find because it's useful to them. You know, I really strive to provide content that helps people. You know, ideally, I'd like to help you earn a living. I'd like it to be something that you find easy to sort of hop into and perhaps create your own career out of, because I did it, right? I mean, I had next to no money at one point, and I learned Figma. I taught myself basic design skills. At the time, I got myself set up on, you know, freelance platforms like Fiverr, and I've brought in so many clients over the years. You know, I'm now at a really comfortable position financially, and it is all through design work. And I hope that what I've managed to show you is that it's not too complicated. It's not the hardest job in the world, and it's a nice way to, you know, talk to loads of different people, meet different people, engage with really cool projects like Boomerang, um, and yeah, just have fun and be creative, which is ultimately what, you know, I'd imagine if you're interested in this channel, you'd be interested in too. So yeah, do leave a comment. Please like and subscribe. Make sure you drop a little comment below just to let me know how you found this. Any weaknesses, I need to know them because I want to improve this as much as possible for you. So my hope is that as we go further down the line, I've got lots more playlists and different topics to cover planned. But you know, help me to shape this channel the way you want it to be. Help me, you know, make these episodes as beneficial as they can be. And if you enjoyed it, just let me know because it makes it all a lot more worth it. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm not sure if that was useful, but this kind of just slightly more advanced layout, and you know, like I say, taking that sort of foundation that we learned in the previous episodes and actually using it on a real world sort of client brief. So yeah, I hope that's been useful, and I shall see you in the next episode.